Good morning and welcome to the third of the EARMA digital sessions. I'm Niall, I'm the Communications Officer with EARMA and I will be the web host for today's discussion. I would just briefly like to explain the format to you here. And in this format, basically you'll be able to participate by asking questions throughout. And I'll just explain how you go about doing that. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, depending on how familiar you are with it, there's a black bar on the bottom of the screen. And one of the tabs there is Q&A. So that's questions and answers, Q&A. And what you can do during that session is if you can just type in your questions there just directly. And myself and Massimo will be going through Massimo is your host. I'll introduce him now in 1 second. We'll be going through those questions. And while Andrew and Sigridur are presenting doing the presentations and the discussion today. So look, we hope you have a great day and we hope you participate as much as you possibly can. And I'd like to now hand you over to Massimo. And Massimo is the head of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology's Brussels office. He's a very active EARMA member. And he's a member of our annual conference program committee, and those guys are largely responsible for putting together the digital session series. So now I'll hand it over to Massimo and take it away.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and welcome from my side as well to this interesting session. Today we are going to discuss about the assessment and its impact on the institutional strategies, having a comparison between two different systems from Sweden and UK, Gothenburg University and Durham University. Today we have two very dynamic speakers, so basically my role of moderator will be very easy. I just let them speak and manage, so that's for you to know. We have Sigridur Beck as a speaker, which is the head of Grants and Innovation Office at the University of Gothenburg. Her work involves the planning for and implementing research policies and strategies on all levels, including international and national funding, quality assessment, bench learning, etc. She is deputy project leader for the research evaluation at the University of Gothenburg, a major program of activities engaging on an international panel of experts to identify conditions and strategies that foster good research environments. Her background includes PhD in history and the roles of research coordinator at the Faculty of Arts and coordinator for the University Deputy Vice Chancellor responsible for issues regarding research. From the UK side, we have Andrew Jackson, which is the Director of Research and Innovation Services at Durham University. He leads the Research and Innovation Services Directorate and supports the development and delivery of Durham institutions-wide research and engagement strategy. Andrew is a member of several university committees and is active in external networks, including a member of the EARMA Policy and Representation Committee. Andrew joined the higher education sector in 2005, leading the Research Innovation Office at the University of York. Prior to this, he held senior roles in businesses ranging from board-level positions in university spin-out companies to program management roles in multinationals. Sigridur is going to introduce the talk, and then we are going to leave it very dynamically, and they will intervene when necessary. The floor is yours, Sigridur.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Massimo, and thank you for having us here. I'm sure that every one of us would have preferred to be together physically as well, but this is the way it is. We're happy to do this. I'm just going to run through the agenda quite quickly before I leave the word to Andrew. So we're going to start by, Andrew is going to start by talking a bit about the research assessment in the UK, the REF system, and share some insights about that. I will then talk about the research assessment in Sweden and share some of my experiences from that. And after that, and we think that this is going to take about 15-20 minutes, each of us talking. After that, we will go forward and share some of our experiences and observations through asking each other questions, like in a sort of an interview way. This is also going to take about 15 and 20 minutes, and then we will leave the questions to you. We'll open the floor after that, or the hyperspace, or where we are. So, Andy, the Zoom is yours.
Okay, so I'm going to start by talking you through some of the characteristics of the research assessment approach in the UK, as Didda was just mentioning a moment ago. And as many of you will know, it is delivered at the moment through what is called the Research Excellence Framework, which is a national programme of activity that's coordinated centrally through the 4 agencies listed on the right-hand side of the slide there, which correspond, of course, to the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. So Research England, the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland, and the Scottish Funding Council deliver this. But it's done in a consistent way across the whole, across the sector. The diagram at the bottom there is just to show you the kind of history of where this came from. So the UK has been doing these sector-wide research assessment exercises, and that's what it was called for the first 4 cycles, the RAE, since 1992. And now we're on roughly an 8-year cycle between different assessment processes. So there's 3 principal reasons why this is done within the UK sector, and the 3 points I've taken here are actually from UKRI, UK Research and Innovations website. And the 3 reasons are, firstly, to provide accountability, and this is really about evidencing the return on investment for the taxpayer in the research base that's funded publicly across the sector. And so part of that is about accountability, but also part of that is about business cases for future investment. So it's not, it's something that the sector is happy with on the whole. The second point is about benchmarking, and this is about effectively providing evidence for us as individual institutions and for external stakeholders in the public and beyond. It provides a ranking effectively of how well institutions are doing against each other, the aim being to drive up performance across the sector in a coordinated way. And then finally, but very importantly, the research assessment process in the UK is used to distribute funding, and the bulk of that is called quality related funding, QR funding, and across the sector that is around £1 billion a year, so it's big money for us. For example, in the institution I work in, Durham University, our QR income that comes in through this stream equates to about £25 million a year, which is about 1/3 of our external research funding. So it's a very significant thing. I thought I'd say a little bit about how the process actually works. So an individual ref score is based on 3 different factors. The biggest one is outputs, and these can be a variety of different things, but in a lot of disciplines, the main outputs that are submitted to the ref process are journal articles. But they can be many other things. So for example, musical score, it could be an output. Books can be an output. There are many different, I think there's about 20 something different types of output that count. The second factor that's the second most significant factor in the overall score is impact. And I'm going to talk a bit more in a moment about exactly what the implications of that are. But impact is measured through a case study approach, and it's defined as impact outside academia, as you can see from the note on the bottom of the slide, within the economy, society, public policy, culture, quality of life. And this is an increasingly important factor within the research excellence framework. So in the last exercise, it was 20% of the overall score. This time it's 25. So it's being emphasized ever more. And then finally, the research environment comes into it. So this is an assessment of the environment we provide for our academics within our individual institutions. So it includes things like external funding, but there's lots of other things in there, ranging from training to infrastructure and facilities. And all 3 of these things are ranked on a 1 to 4 star system, and you can see on the right hand of the slide there the meaning of the 4 different star rankings, going from national recognition at 1 star right up to absolutely world leading at 4 star. And importantly, the way that the funding system works, money is only distributed to the 4 star and 3 star returns at the moment. So there is a real emphasis on funding the very best quality research within the sector. And the assessment process is by panels of peers. So what are some of the characteristics of this system, and the drivers that it creates? Well, one of the big factors that drives how we react to the ref is the fact that it contributes towards league tables, and it's a benchmarking across the sector, against international standards. But really, what it's all about is ranking institutions within the UK higher education sector. Now, one of the important things to note is that the ref doesn't give a single number as a result, and as a consequence, what you see is a number of different league tables and metrics emerging, depending on how you combine and emphasize those different aspects of the results. So here's just 3 that I picked. This is actually taken from the current Wikipedia page on the Research Excellence Framework. But I wanted to emphasize the fact that, for example, within these 3 different league tables, one is based on research power, which takes into account the quality and also the size of the submission. In other words, how many people you have working within each unit of assessment that's put into the process. The middle table is based on quality and grade point average, and the third one is based on the percentage of your research that's classified as world leading. And you can see that within those 3 different league tables, the University of Edinburgh, I've used that as an example because it moves around quite a bit. In one league table it's 4th, and in another it's 9th. So what tends to happen is that institutions emphasize the league tables in which they do particularly well, and to an extent that's good, because it means that depending on what you're most interested in, you can slice the data in different ways. But you can argue a bit that it detracts from the objectivity of it in some ways, because of course institutions tend to pick the league tables in which they do best and push those. But what this means, because of the impact on league tables, which drive reputation, which in turn drive, to some extent, drive important things for us like international student recruitment, and because of the direct investment that we get from the ref, this results in quite high levels of investment within institutions across the sector in preparation and delivery. And it underpins business cases and influences strategy in a number of ways that we're going to pick up on and talk about today. So this slide delves into more of the detail about what I mean by some of those influences on how we operate as an institution. So what have we got here? This is looking at the effect of the impact case studies. So as I mentioned before, impact is judged within the ref through narrative case studies that look at, what is the underpinning research that led to the impact, what has actually happened, and what are we claiming has occurred as a result of that research, and what are the sources that corroborate our claims on this. So it's quite a rigorous process. Now, each submission to a unit of assessment, which roughly map onto academic departments, requires 2 outputs per full-time equivalent member of staff. So in many cases that will be 2.5 outputs. In many cases that would equate to journal papers. But it also requires 2 impact case studies for every submission and another one for every 15 FTE staff you have on top of that. So that's a lot of numbers, but I've, in the second bullet point, drawn that out for an example of an academic department that has 34 staff. You'd need 85 outputs and 3 impact case studies. What that means, though, is that the effect on your overall score of each individual impact case study is a lot more than the effect on your overall score of each individual output. So why does that matter? Well, the graph on the right of this chart looks at one particular unit of assessment. I think in this particular case it's computer science and informatics, and it's some modelling we've done on publicly available data within the university to look at the sensitivity on our ranking position as a result of changes to our to the assessment of the impact case studies. So on the vertical axis of that graph, you can see, can I wave my mouse? Can you see my mouse cursor if I do that? Somebody nod if you can. Yeah, great, okay. So on the vertical axis, of the graph, you've got all of the institutions that submitted to this particular discipline ranked. So you can see there's about 90 of them altogether. And on the other axis, you've got their grade point average within this unit. So you can see the very best institutions were getting up to over 3.5 grade point average. Remember, 4 is the absolute best you could be. And the lower ranked ones were down here at sort of 1.25. What's important though is that there's a lot of clustering here. So very small differences in grade point average around the sort of 10 to 40 ranking make a very big difference to your position within that rank. And also very importantly, if you have a fairly small unit of assessment or fairly small submission, as we have in this case, so the table at the bottom shows some data from our modelling for this particular example submission. So we got 14.2 FTE staff. That means we only need 2 case studies for this submission. A very small change in how one of your impact case studies is judged makes a very big difference to your ranking position. So according to our modelling here, the 3 yellow dots show plus and minus 1 star performance on one impact case study. So I think we've taken a case study and said, okay, where would we be if this is 3 star? Where would it be if it's 4 star? Where would we be if it's 2 star? And you can see from the table at the bottom that tiny change in how that impact case study is judged moves that department in the ranking by 21 places. So what this means is that the stakes are very high when it comes to getting these things right, and it leads to a significant amount of emphasis and investment, both in terms of delivering impact and in terms of evidencing that impact and creating strong case studies for our submission. So that's just one example of how the way in which the ref works incentivizes real attention on preparation, real attention on the things that drive success in the assessment. So we'll come back later to what some of those things mean, but for now I'll hand over to Didde to talk about the system in Sweden.
Thank you very much, Andy. And well, like you're saying, the REF is a very systematic system indeed, and it has some major implications on the whole universities, like you were just saying. So I'm going to talk a bit about the research assessment system that is not at all like the UK system. In fact, the system isn't really there yet, but we're getting there. And I'm going to go back in history just to give you the context, but because I think this is it's important to understand what kind of discussions we've had in order to understand what the situation is today. So I'm going to 2013, which is when the Swedish government, the former Swedish government, handed over the task to the Swedish Research Council to come up with a model for a national research assessment, which was not in place. And the Swedish Research Council came back with a sort of a copy of the REF. But the thing is that this was the model they presented was highly criticized by the universities in Sweden, mainly because people felt it was way too expensive, way too much administration, and there were uncertainties about whether or not this model would then include a funding mechanism. There were uncertainties about, well, many things. And at the same time, in 2013, the government had also issued another task to the Swedish Innovation Agency, Vinnova, to come up with an idea to evaluate impact. And they came up with several ideas, and all those ideas were also heavily criticized by the university sector, basically because of the previous reasons, but also because they felt that either the indicators were too many, or they were too few, or the system didn't fit the variety of university and university colleges that is in Sweden. So the and nothing happened for a while. Then we had a new government that came in 2014, and in 2016 the new government decided to hand over the torch to the Swedish Higher Education Authority instead. And this came as a surprise to many, I think, because the Swedish Higher Education Authority, so far as the name suggests, had only been assessing education. But it was welcomed by many of the universities as well, because what the Swedish Higher Education Authority did was to initiate a discussion with the universities under the Association of Swedish Higher Educations, the SUHF logo that you see there. And together in a dialogue, they put together a framework for research quality assurance. And in that, then decided to put the whole research assessment inside something that the Swedish Higher Education Authority calls institutional review of the HEI's quality assurance processes, which is quite a lengthy thing, but still. And this is one of the components in the Swedish Higher Education Authority assessment systems, but has not until now included research and collaboration. So there's a pilot ongoing started 2019 with 3 institutions that are now incorporating research and collaboration in this institutional review. And we will know the results of that in a few months, I think, hopefully, if COVID hasn't changed all that. And then the idea is to start the ordinary institutional review in 2021. That is, so what I want to share here is 3 differences between the UK system. One is that, yes, there's something going on with the screen now. Yes, okay, thank you. One is that since the entrance of the Swedish Higher Education Authority, the approach has been more bottom-up than I think it has been in the UK. This has allowed the universities to be a part of the research assessment system, which I think everybody thinks is a good thing. The second thing is, of course, that there is the shift from focus on research outputs, which was in the suggestion made by the Swedish Research Council in 2013. And that has totally shifted over to focus on quality assurance at an institutional level, leaving the research in assessment in terms of research outputs to the research society in itself. And third, but not the least, this model does not include a funding mechanism at all. So if you do fine in the institutional review, that's fine, and you will then have another review in 6 years because it's a 6-year cycle. If you do not succeed, either in one of the criterias or all the criterias, the punishment is that you have to go through the whole process again and again and again until you're sort of through. So, but it's not a funding mechanism involved. We can talk more about these differences later, but I'm now going back in time again. There's no place like the past for a historian like myself, but I want to share the experiences we've had at the University of Gothenburg, because we've also experienced research assessment at an institutional level. And that started in 2010 with something called Research Evaluation for Development 2010, RED 10. And that evaluation was a self-evaluation with peer panels and site visits. The recommendations from that assessment were of great value for the university management at that time, and helped the university management to frame and formulate the university strategy that was then being conducted. So the vision or strategy document for the University of Gothenburg for 2014 to 2020, called Vision 2020, was very much guided by the recommendations from the Red 10. So the university board decided that there should be a new research assessment before 2020. So the planning for the new RED began in 2016. So the university board had just said that they wanted a new assessment, but they didn't say anything about the content or the structure or how it should be framed. So the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research at that time, myself and a colleague from the Grants and Innovation Office, did a pre-study to understand more what the university actually wanted and needed in form of a research assessment. And we conducted interviews with all the deans, with all the heads of departments. We have 38 departments and 8 faculties, so it was quite it was many interviews, and we also had a focus group of researchers. And after discussing both internal and externally, and having looked at the system in the UK, the REF, but also the system in the Netherlands, the Standard Evaluation Protocol, and looked at our Nordic colleagues, and also, of course, the institutions in Sweden, there was an agreement that what we actually wanted from a research assessment was the aim of the assessment should be to enhance the quality of the research and research environment, and that obviously makes sense for most people. But can I have the... Yes, thank you. So thank you. It was then decided that the aims should be to identify ways of enhancing the quality of research and research environments. And this is also the reason why the focus was then put on the process and prerequisites for performing research of high quality. In that, we are saying that we're leaving the research output for the researchers, but we're saying that what we can do at an institutional level is to provide the most excellent conditions for high quality research. And in order to do that, we need to know what are the drivers for the excellent research environment. So we then went on to the planning of this research assessment. We gathered a resource group that collected data, staff data, funding data, bibliometrics, and so forth. We collected these and gave it to the self-evaluation, to the evaluation units with the self-evaluation template. We then gave the whole material to, of course, the panelists that came then to the University of Gothenburg in 2019, all 141 of them, which is, of course, a good thing that they came last year, not you, because that wouldn't have been possible. So it has been a long process, and we are now in the phase where we're looking at the action plans that the evaluation units have done. We can take the next slide. Yes. So considering the key themes in RED 19, these are the key themes that were put into the self-evaluation template. And of course, they are, the idea is that they reflect conditions that create excellent research and research environments. And we didn't know at the time what kind of criteria the Swedish Higher Education Authority would come up with, because we did our process before the Swedish Higher Education Authority had received its mission from the government. And of course, we have been we've been talking to them, not all the time, but we have made sure that they know what we're doing, and as other universities. So it didn't come as much of a surprise to us when we saw the assessment criteria for the institutional review. When it was presented, this is the assessment criteria that they're now using in the pilot. And although the headlines are of course not exactly the same, I feel very well, I feel happy about the fact that the Red 19 fits very nicely into the national system now. And hopefully the universities have influenced it in this way that we want to have it. Yes. So to conclude, the RED is a part of the quality assurance system at the University of Gothenburg, and at the right hand you can see how the cycle is intended. This is also a 6-year cycle that begins with planning and then evaluation, reports are then translated into action plans. And I think it's important to say that the results of the reports are owned by the evaluation units, and are followed up by the next level. So all the heads of departments, all the deans and the university management have written their own action plan based on the recommendations, and these plans are then followed up by the next level. So the departments are followed up by the faculties are followed up by the vice chancellor, the vice chancellors is followed up by the university board. And after a follow-up, we do an annual follow-up, but after a 3-year follow-up, we think that we have enough material to start planning for the next phase. And this includes, okay, so has the recommendation had the effect that we wanted? Do we want to ask any other questions? How should we then frame the next evaluation phase when it comes to the national system and so forth? So it's intended to be flexible and quality driven. And so far, the university management action plan is very much what is going to be, well, let's say the recommendations to the university management are going to be fed in the next strategy document, which is what is being worked on now. So the recommendations that we have received from Red 19 are going to go into the new strategy document. So I think to sum up, I think that we have very different systems, but both of them, of course, have very high, well, have implications on the institutional strategy and also on the research support services, I think. Would you agree, Andy?
Thank you. Yes, I would. And so the next slide we've just kind of thrown in as a, well, as a digest of some of the discussions we've been having about the ways in which both of these two systems impact on institutional strategy. So I'm going to just briefly have a look at some of these points, and then we're going to ask each other a few questions which we think will hopefully draw out some of the differences in our experiences, both being practitioners in these respective sectors, before throwing the floor open for conversations from participants. Okay, so what have we got here? And this obviously isn't all of the areas in which institutional strategy is influenced by the research assessment process. But I guess the first thing to say is that when I took a look through our full strategy documents at Durham University, and the research excellence framework pops up all over the place throughout that document, in a number of different ways and for a number of different reasons. But I guess the first thing to say is that it is a key performance indicator within the strategy. So how well we do in REF, compared to our peers and compared to our previous results, is a key thing that we look at to see whether or not the investments we're making and the strategies we adopt around research are actually working. We also use REF at a strategic level to think about how to plan things like the size and shape of departments. So we've used analysis of how our peers have performed in REF to inform us about things like critical mass in different academic disciplines. And of course, you do see a correlation between sizes of academic departments and their performance in terms of benchmark exercises like the REF. And this is the kind of stuff that we do use all the time at a strategic level when thinking about the size and shape and investments in the institution in that respect. But there are also a few other things that come out of this. I mean, within the context of the academic environment, things like time allocation models, academic recruitment, performance progression. Many of these are done with an eye to REF, both in terms of ensuring that academics are able to well, I guess it's a research environment question, that academics have an environment in which that is conducive to doing world-leading and world-changing research, but also using that as a way of benchmarking performance at different levels. And I guess one thing that REF does do is it gives us a way of codifying academic excellence in terms of outputs and impact that does play into some of these things like recruitment and performance and progression. Research metrics are obviously a key thing, and there's a lot of discussion going on around the sector in terms of the right way to use research metrics, ensuring that we don't read into them more than we should. But nevertheless, that is a significant element of how university research management happens at the moment. And then, as I mentioned already, investments in support services and also investments in infrastructure and other things are often made in light of the data that we get out of the REF exercise and the benchmarking that provides. So I think now it's time for us to ask each other some questions. We have no idea if this is going to work, but let's give it a try. Was I going to ask you the first question, Dida? Or the other way around?
I think so, yes.
Okay, I'm going to get you to go first then.
Fine.
So the first question that I was going to ask you was, within Gothenburg University, what are the ways in which the mechanisms by which research is assessed that we've just discussed is reflected in your support services? And who are the people involved in that, and what do they do?
At the University of Gothenburg, we didn't have a set group working on institutional research assessment, but we had the competence within the Grants and Innovation Office because we have a team working with management support, and in that team we have the competence of people doing smaller evaluations, but and those kind of work. So we quickly were able to form a project group within the Grants and Innovation Office that could support throughout the whole phase from the preparations to now. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I think it did. What do they focus on? What is it that really drives them?
Well, they focus on, I mean, it's been everything from supporting when it comes to what kind of data would be relevant for this kind of assessment, what is important to have in the self-evaluation template. Of course, this is done in dialogue with the reference group and the research board, but also planning for the site visit, making sure all the documents are in place, reading through the self-evaluation, making sure the site panelists know what they're supposed to be doing, keeping contact, and so forth.
Thank you.
So if I can ask you the same question, what kind of a support team do you have at your office?
Okay, well, within my team, I have, I guess, two main groups that focus on support for REF. One is a group that provides overall administration for the submission. So at the moment, they're very busy because we're coming up to the deadline for submission, although it looks like it's going to be moved back in light of COVID-19. But there's an enormous amount of administration to do to make sure that we are supporting our academic community in terms of helping to ensure that we are ready with a compliant submission that represents our best work, and that puts the university in the best possible light. And that ranges from things like supporting the processes of peer review, internal and external, so that we pick the right outputs for the submission, ensuring compliance, so there are things like open access requirements that we have to make sure we meet, and also supporting the process of well, I guess just helping that community from an administrative perspective, the academic community. The overall leadership of the REF is delivered, as you would expect, by senior academics. We have a committee structure that's academically chaired that does that, but we're there to support the administration of that process. The other big team within my directorate that look after the REF are the impact team. So as I mentioned earlier on, there is a strong business case for ensuring that that we deliver a good performance in terms of impact, and that is something that requires quite a bit of effort. I guess that's supported and delivered by quite a few different bits of the administration, including business development team and so on. But we actually have a dedicated impact team at Durham University who look after the various different aspects, both of supporting academics to deliver impact by helping them find the right partners and supporting those projects, and also importantly at the moment providing evidence of that impact and producing strong impact case studies. So there's those two quite significant areas of activity. So it's quite a big operation within our team.
Can I ask?
Yes, you can.
Question?
Yes.
Thank you. So you mentioned the reviewers earlier of the REF.
Mm-hmm.
Do you actually know who's reviewing you? I mean, how transparent is this REF? And well, that's perhaps a separate question. But another question is, how do you, if you know how they are, do you use them for preparing the REF? And there's the question of transparency, but also, and I'm sorry, this is a different question, but the scoring system, how easy is it to actually understand the scoring system?
Good question. Well, good multiple questions. Yes. Okay. Well, we do know who the panels are, and the panels are drawn from the academic community. And our institution has a number of people, a number of senior academics who are on those panels, so we have access to that expertise. And as you would expect, many of our internal, I mentioned before that we have internal academically chaired governance structures around supporting the REF submission, and people within those structures are often people who either are currently or have or both served on REF panels, and therefore they have a good idea about how that scoring process has worked in the past. The scoring process, though, is a normative process, and therefore there is, of course, a certain amount of judgment involved in assessing what the likely future score would be of any particular output or impact case study. Some outputs or impact case studies, it's quite easy to say that they will be judged as 4-star because we know that they are, they're of a particular level of prestige, or they've achieved particular levels of attention and highly cited papers that are that we know are going to meet that benchmark. But sometimes on the boundaries, it's not easy to be sure. And so we use both internal and external peer review to inform the process by which we make output selections. But ultimately, it's an academically led and academically managed process by which that happens. Does that answer your question? Okay. Can I ask you a question now?
Well, okay, yes.
Okay, so in our system, as we've identified, there is a clear connection to funding and resource allocation across the sector as a result of the performance in the research excellence framework, and that I think is one of the key things that leads to the strength of engagement both within the academic and support community and within the strategic framework of institutions. Now in Sweden you don't have that same connection, so my question was going to be, how easy is it to get buy-in for owning the results of processes like Red 19, and indeed how easy is it to make the business case to invest in doing them well?
Well, excellent question. I mean, I think there are two sides of this coin, and I think the preparatory phase is very, very important if you're going to be able to do what this kind of exercise that is focusing on conditions and is not going to give you any money if you do well. But this is exactly why we spent so much time on interviewing all the deans, interviewing all the heads, doing interviews with focus groups, making sure that everybody was on board from the beginning. If you don't have everybody on board from the beginning, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to own the results. And we made it very clear that if this is going to have any impact at all, everybody needs to buy in and own their own results. And I think, well, I mean, obviously there are always some things we could have done better, but I think that many of the departments and faculties and academics in general find it quite like a relief to be able to do an honest self-evaluation where you can actually be honest and say, well, this is something that we're not very good at, and getting help from critical friends, as this panelists were, providing recommendations to enhance the quality further on.
Okay.
Was
yeah, that makes sense.
To the question?
Yes, it was. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, and I think that is interesting that it's of course it relies on people believing that the results and will help them.
Of course.
In the future, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and of course there will always be, I mean, you will always have people that want the system of the ref that gets you money if you're excellent, but the majority seems to think that this is a good way of assessing research as well.
As we have many good questions also coming from the audience, maybe we can start challenging you. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
please.
That could be
fire away.
Yeah, that's first of all, let me allow me to ask you a question, because I noticed very interesting things coming out from your presentations, and two different ways of doing the assessment. I noticed that the UK system is also quite focused on the impact, probably not only in scientific terms, but also in economical and business terms, while the Swedish one looks very, very on the research in itself, the scientific value of your production. And to a European extent, of course, living in Brussels, I am quite engaged in the changes that the Commission is also putting on the table. And there is, this raising model of modern universities, which are more and more asked to deliver not only scientific basic research, but also to deliver on measurable outputs like exploitable products, or even, why not, innovation for the European competitiveness. So my question for you is how you assess, and this is of course the real tricky things, how you assess the real impact deriving from your research in terms of commercial products. And this is really, really tricky, I understand, because it's the really difficult thing. And how do you see this change in the European system is going to impact also on your national evaluation systems? And then I'm going to read some interesting questions also from the audience. I don't know who from you would like to answer on this.
Well,
who would like to start, because I'm interested.
Well, I can start because yes, this has been a huge discussion at a national level in Sweden as well, whether or not to evaluate and how then to evaluate, how to measure impact, not only commercial but societal and economic impact. And like I said in the beginning, there were some models that were tried out, but heavily criticized. I think we're coming to a new, I don't know, I think that many universities are now trying sort of the same way the UK has been doing with the impact cases. Of course, I can also see that the European Commission emphasizing more and more on research and innovation. But we need to be very careful, I think, when it comes to these matters, and not just think about commercial products and think about innovation and utilization in a much broader context. And of course, this is what makes it a tricky thing. So I don't have a solution, just problems.
Do you?
Okay,
And
well,
you have all the solutions.
no, I don't. No, don't be silly. But what can I add to that? Well, not a huge amount, but I think, I guess in the UK, because impact has been measured systematically through the REF for a while, I mean, there are accepted models, I guess, that look at impact on the two-dimensional scale of reach and significance. So if I develop a product that saves someone's life, that has significance. But if it saves 1 million lives, it has reach as well. And so you look at, you know, both of those two things. It's always, I think it always has to be assessed by a narrative approach. I think metricating and quantitative approaches obviously work for some things like commercial impact, but as we've discussed, impact can be on well-being, it can be on culture, it can be on society in many different ways, on policy, and therefore it really has to be something that is assessed through a broad narrative approach and assessed by peers who are in a position to make reasoned judgments about those things. One observation I would make, and this is relevant to the European context and our own sector, is that as we move towards more and more challenge-led research funding, the question of impact actually becomes much more embedded in the whole process, and therefore the question of, you know, separately assessing impact, both in terms of predicting impact or you know, preparing to deliver impact and measuring it at the back end, becomes actually much more embedded in the whole process of delivering research. And of course, the missions within Horizon Europe are a good example of that. But you know, you see it across all sectors where that's becoming an increasingly important feature of the research funding landscape.
Thank you. We have a set of questions given by the audience that are triggered by your presentation. I would like to start with the one coming from, we have Anke Dahlman, which have been very active in putting questions. And the first question is about the UK system. It says, as size matters, how and by whom is decided what a research unit of staff is? And what is the...
Okay, well, I'm just pleased as an audience. Can I just say that first of all? But secondly, well, so just let me understand the question a bit better. What is? Do you mean what is? What determines the boundary of a unit of assessment? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Or
I suspect is a matter of yeah, who decide what a research staff is.
Okay, well, okay, well, I mean, I guess, I can say a few things about that, but the units of assessment mostly map onto academic disciplines. So within a typically structured university like ours, pretty much every academic department maps onto one unit of assessment. So the one I was talking about in my slide was unit of assessment number 11. That's computer science and informatics, and our computer science department maps onto that, and pretty much everyone in that department submits to that unit. In terms of deciding who is in and who is out, it used to be the case in previous exercises that you could decide who you put forward. So some universities would submit nearly all their staff, some would submit a tiny proportion of their staff, and that was a bit of a balancing act because the amount of funding you were given depended both on the quality of your submission and on the size of your submission. So in that sense, there was an incentive to put in more people because that would boost your funding, providing they were of a good enough quality. But of course, that led to some controversy because you got some universities who were making quite small submissions relative to their size, but actually doing pretty well by, in grade point average terms, by selecting very carefully. So the system now is that everybody has to submit everybody. So any academics who meet certain criteria for being independent researchers that are working within your institution on the census date, they have to go in and they have to put forward between 1 and 5 outputs, an average of 2.5 per FTE. So that, in that sense, that sort of removed that question a bit from the system. The question of critical mass is an interesting one. When I was talking about that, I guess what I was saying was that, when you look across different universities and different academic departments and submissions from academic departments within those institutions, you can correlate the size of the submission with the quality of the submission, and you see that there is a link, particularly in sciences, where the larger departments tend to produce more of the research that is judged to be world leading. So that there is a critical mass element there that you can actually measure. And I guess that, that's significant because it's changed, to some extent, that's changed the structure of the academic community, because it's meant we have fewer small, individual academic level research groups than we used to have. There's more clustering, there's more bigger groups across the sector than there used to be as a result of that.
Okay, thank you. There is a question for Sigridur from Ami Radlberger, sorry, University of Vienna. You mentioned that, of course, also societal impact needs to be measured. And the question is how you do measure the societal impact.
So I would agree with Andy that this has to be done in a narrative context. So what we did in the Red 19 was that we asked specific questions about impact and relevance and how the departments and faculties were, if they had strategies, if so, what were these strategies, how did they, I think it's important that the disciplines by themselves define what they want to be driving as in terms of impact or research or whatever. So they need to, we need to help them to formulate their own strategies and then drive into that direction. So I can't tell you what, I can tell you examples of what societal impact could be, but I don't think that we will ever have a set menu. We could have a menu where you can choose from, but this has to be quite flexible.
Okay. And there is a question for both of you coming from Marco Berzano, which links to the ability to attract international research funding, which is of course crucial for universities. So what are the relative indicators and targets to evaluate performance from the point of view of attracting additional resources? And what's the strategies to evaluate the activities and support academics in both your universities? This is
Andy, would you like to start?
I was just going to invite you to go first on that one, actually.
I noticed the panic in your eyes.
No, once again, I'm just making sure I understand the question here. I'm just thinking through it. So we're talking about international research funding and attracting international research funding. So that's a little bit That's a little bit of an adjacent question to the question of research assessment, but although nevertheless a very interesting one. And I think, and I think actually that's one of the ways in which research assessment within the UK and the reputational benefits it brings puts us in a good position to attract international partners, and is relevant and important. What are the how do we evaluate our success in international research awards? Well, I mean, I guess it's like everything else we do in that, and Dida was saying this a minute ago within the context of societal impact. We expect academic disciplines and departments to have, and indeed they do, to have strategies and plans for securing the scale and type of income they need to deliver their academic mission, and that varies from one department to another, and so that goes for international collaborations as well as it does for national collaborations. And so to me, the question of, well, how do you evaluate success in international collaboration? I would say that I evaluate that success by observing that by the academic groups and departments across our institution have strong and credible strategies within which they are looking at the international research funding environment and the international collaborative environment, and that they're making the most of that and achieving an appropriate level of income and engagement to deliver their academic mission. And that will vary hugely from one subject to another, from one group to another, and therefore it's difficult to sort of set sort of institutional level benchmarks and targets for that. So I think it's very much around having the strategies and aligning your activities with those strategies and measuring your success against the objectives in those strategies. Looks like you want to say something as well, Dida.
No, I would just like to add, I agree, but I think also that the strategies are the most important things. But of course, the institution or faculty or department, depending, can of course then have incentives for certain types of programs, international programs. And I mean, for instance, at the University of Gothenburg, the Vice Chancellor co-funds some of the programs we want researchers to go after. So that's one way to incentivize it. But we don't really evaluate it. We just make sure we have the support needed for that to happen, and then it's up to the departments and faculties to actually act upon it.
Yeah, I think we can answer to a couple of questions more if you agree. Even
of course. Yeah, no, that's fine.
On the boundary of the timing that we have. The first one is from Ragnar Lee, and he's asking, how do you think the two assessment for the systems impact on the transformation into open science? If there is any relationship with this. You can also say no. Yes.
Well, I can go in on that one fairly early on, because I mean the ref actually requires a certain amount of engagement with the open science agenda, because publications have to be open access within certain criteria. And that's one of the big administrative tasks that we're actually undertaking, is making sure that our submission is compliant with the open access guidance. So to that extent, the UK framework is very supportive of providing an incentive for the sector to engage with open science in that respect, at least. As we move down that road, with the advent of Plan S and Coalition S, and also moving towards more nuanced, more ambitious approaches to open data as well as open access, then I think it remains to be seen exactly how that will be reflected in the assessment process. Because in a sense that can work both ways. If we're saying that we want more open access, that may mean publishing in journals which previously we would not have necessarily been the ones we selected. So it slightly shifts the criteria potentially for what is, for selections around publication targets. And we would need the assessment processes to take those shifts into account. And I think that's a discussion that's going on in the sector at the moment.
Yeah. Sigridur?
I think that, well, in our case, I think that, well, the question about open science is seen as part of the a quality assurance system. So the Swedish Higher Education Authority has that in its system. So I think we're very much going to have to answer that. Questions about that kind of, I mean, open access is just going to be a thing, one of the parts that we need to have in place to be able to get good review on the institutional review.
Okay, the final question I think is nice and a bit parallel to the discussion, but I think is very interesting, and is given to Andrew, but I would like to expand to both of you. It comes from Kimberly. And in the Netherlands, there is a discussion on the Matthew effect in funding. The one that get the funding and publications get more funding. It is being discussed in the UK and in Sweden, of course, in the UK in the light of the REF and the role of the Matthew effect in the output. But probably this is also something that can influence the strategy in Sweden. So maybe you can both elaborate on this.
So sorry, just rephrase the main bit of that question. So the matching of who performs best gets the most funding.
Yeah.
And the relationship between those two things. Well, yes. I mean, you can see from the way the REF is structured, of course, that the quality related funding is allocated to those who perform best in terms of the quality of their outputs and impact and environment. And that is both an incentive regime, but it's also, you could argue, it is there to support the sector. That if you're doing that type of research, you need the funding in order to support those environments, and I think that's logical. The other dimension to that, though, is that actually if you do an exercise to look at the correlation between external research income and performance in the REF, there is a pretty tight correlation. The universities that bring in the most research awards tend to perform the best in the REF, and actually there's a pretty strong mapping between the two, to the extent that some stakeholders in the sector have actually argued that, well, why bother with the REF when actually we can basically predict how we're all going to perform on the basis of our research income. Now, in a sense, that's not surprising, because both are a peer review exercise. One is a peer review exercise before the work takes place when you put in a grant application. The other is a peer review exercise on the outputs and impact that happen from that. But it's the same stakeholder set who are looking at that, and therefore that link is not surprising. I think it will always be a source of debate, but I can't see at the moment any strong voices that are making headway in suggesting that should change from where it is now. Of course, institutions further down the ranking in terms of the REF performance will always argue that the funding should be distributed more evenly, and I think there's an argument for that, and I can completely see that. Whereas the institutions at the top will always argue that things should stay as they are. This is the age-old debate that I'm sure will continue.
Your answer tells me that you're still not discussing a way to manage it in UK.
But I guess what I'm saying is that within the context that I'm personally operating, I can't speak for everybody in the sector. I can't speak for every different decision-making forum. But within the context that I'm operating with at the moment, of course, we've very much got ahead in the current REF cycle, and within that, I don't think things are going to change very much in that respect.
I mean, this is an ideological question. Could also be a philosophical one, and we could spend days and days talking about it. But and in the end, I think it's important for everybody to think about what it is we want to, what kind of behavior we want to be driven. I mean, there is also, of course, a discussion about ethics here that we could have. But I think this discussion is much more debated in Sweden than it is in the UK. This is the sense I get, and this is one of the things we want to make sure in the system that we raise the overall level. I mean, we know that all the excellent researchers are going to keep on getting funded, but we need to sort of help raise the level more, and this is what the support we can do on an institutional level, and therefore we are focusing on the research environments and the support there.
Okay. I think we have gone beyond the timing that was allocated for the event, but it was very, very interesting. I would like to deserve you a virtual applause for your great presentation. Unfortunately, we cannot have a live one asking the audience to do it, but Sigridur and Anders, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting, and also noticing the amount of participants and the amount of questions we received. Unfortunately, we haven't had the time to handle them all, but I think that it was very, very, very interesting. So thank you very much to both of you. Thank you to Niall for the support behind the lines. We noticed that you're still there, Niall. Thank you very much for being our guardian angel, somehow ensuring that everything was okay. And thank you very much to all the participants. I don't know, Niall, if you want to add some last words from the EARMA point of view.
No, I think that's great. We're delighted that people are participating in the way that they are. Thanks again for joining us today. We have another fantastic session this afternoon as well. I hope you can join us for that. The Right Stuff, the workshop, with some tips on how to write the perfect proposal from our expert Suzanne Darcy. So join us for that one, and thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you with the rest of the sessions as we continue this week. Thanks everyone.
Very good.
Thanks for having us.
Goodbye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.